Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Grants Committee meeting of Brant County Council. Before we begin, we've taken attendance, noting that Councillor Garneau and Councillor Chambers aren't here yet. They could still be here, but we'll check. We'll look for them in a few minutes. This meeting, by the way, can go any way you'd like it to go. This can be the best 5-minute meeting you've ever seen, and we've got 2 hours slated, so you just pick your poison. I'm here to make sure it's the best meeting I can make it. Attendance has been taken. I'm going to move now to the approval of the agenda the way it sits. Councillor Pierce, Councillor Oakley. Are there any objections or comments? Noting that Councillor Garneau is now here, and so is Allison Newton. There's a special seat right here for you, Allison. Councillor Miller?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. When it comes time to the recommendation, rather than put it all on the floor, I'm going to ask that we go through them each of those 5 items one at a time.
Okay, we're going to then. Anything else for the agenda? Councillor Coleman?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And at appropriate time, I'm going to bring forth a new resolution on the grants tonight.
Okay, so noting that, we'll hear your resolution then before we do the staff recommendation.
Thank you.
That's the way I think it should be done. Declaration of pecuniary interest. Does anyone have any? Councillor Bell.
Yeah, just a question, Mr. Mayor. I mean, it's one of the potential recipients of our grants that I work with. I don't know whether you want me to declare that now or at the time.
Just wait till at the time. Depending on how we're going to deal with the grants, it might not be necessary.
Okay, thank you.
Anybody else? Councillor Miller?
Yeah, well, speaking of working with groups, I mean, is that a pecuniary interest is what I would ask. My understanding is if you're on the board of directors, you might declare a pecuniary interest if you work with a group or volunteer with a group or help a group. I'm not sure if that's a pecuniary interest.
Yeah. Well, looking through the list, though, so many of us sit on so many of these committees and things. It's going to be hard to see the vested interest in them. I mean, if we've attended some of their meetings or their AGMs, does that mean we support them? Does that mean we should declare? Actually, they all have everything to do with the citizens of the County of Brant. So for us not to be interested or invested in most of them would make us not really aware of things. Councillor Coleman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I've always looked at it, if I sat on the board of directors on those organizations, then I would have to declare a conflict like I have done board in the middle board before. So that's the way I would look at it.
Yeah, everyone's good with that? Nothing else for the agenda? All those in favor? Opposed and carried. Okay, so now we're going to go to number 4, which is RPT 174-23. Councillor Coleman, you have a resolution.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I'm seeking a seconder. Whereas the 2023 approved budget includes $360,000 for community grants, that 50% of the $360,000 be allotted towards the Brantford General Hospital and new build, and that the remaining $180,000 be allocated proportionally to the grant applications based on staff scoring. Thank you.
You have a seconder in Councillor Pierce. Discussion. Councillor Howe is your first, and then Councillor Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you, I'm obviously we're all fans of the Brantford General Hospital, and we want to see their new project succeed, and it will succeed. However, I want to respectfully offer a counter position to my colleague. I believe that the hospital funding has to be a separate conversation, a separate piggy bank, for lack of a better word. We tell groups that we have a community grant program, and we tell them that they have to apply to be considered within this grant program. And we, as a council, determined the scoring criteria by which staff would evaluate those applications, which is a different process than it was 3 or 4 years ago. And so with all that said, we have a group of, 50 applicants who have been scored. The Brantford General Hospital is not part of that process. They were not an applicant. They've certainly come to the county and expressed that they're looking for funding, and that's a conversation we have to have. But I am not in favor of robbing this group of applicants to put a $150,000 seed into the hospital. I think we need to address the people the groups who applied through the process that we create. Thanks.
Thank you, Councilor. Councilor Miller, you're next.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just through to Councilor Coleman. Can you? I wonder if we could just clarify that a little bit, or just pin it down, because there's some grants, if you read down in the analysis, that aren't part of this process. Mount Pleasant Optimist Club, Scotland Optimist Club, St. George Lions Club, again, and we talked about this, because they use that money to maintain a public park for our citizens. So I'm just wondering if those are excluded, as well as any other pre-approved grants.
Next, Councilor Coleman, you want to respond?
Responding to Councilor Miller, those would be excluded because they are already in the system.
Councilor Pierce?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you, I've got to admit, when I heard this suggestion from Councilor Coleman, it immediately struck me as, this is a great idea. Yes, the hospital is a different beast, we could call it, but we need to start somewhere. And yes, this money is put aside every year for grants. There are some that I will say come back every year, which is, some could look at that as, what are they doing to help themselves in order to continue operations? As far as the scoring that went down, I was kind of the spearhead behind that suggestion a few years ago that we do it on a scoring rank. And if you look at some of the scores, yes, there's a few of them that are above 6 and a few of them that are above 7, but there's also several of them that are 3.8, 3.9, 4.4. To me, that's not good. So it's not a very difficult scoring system that we have. And if you're only getting 3.8, 4.4, 3.9 out of 10, to me, that is a hand that's out for anything that it can get. So I am absolutely in support of this suggestion. We're not saying no, that we're not giving any money to these folks. All we're doing is, in essence, cutting it in half. So I think that I think it's a good idea. And there are some in there that my own personal feeling is, even though I was the one that said they should get 50% if they're under 5, I think there's a few of them that shouldn't even get that, because there's some major things that are missing from their applications. And there's also several of them in there that are for operating costs. And if you're having to rely on grant money just to operate your whatever it is, then maybe you should revisit your business model. But that's my thoughts. I am in favor of this motion.
Councilor Coleman, you want to respond?
I don't think I need to respond, but he was in favor. I'm speaking in favor of this motion, or whatever, amendment or whatever to the system we got. That I think I've been flustered by this grants for a number of years. And when I got on council years ago, we were under $100,000. Now we're asked over $400,000. The ask. And a few years ago, Councilor Pierce was right. He pushed for a system and to get a scoring system in there and make it work. But I'm just flustered by some of the ones that keep coming back and back and back. And we are not the Bank of Brant. I think we need to do something, and I really want to get this hospital thing started. Whether it's $50,000 or $100,000, we need to make a start. That's why I'm supporting. We could turn every one of these grants down tonight, and there'd be $360,000 there left, and we could all give it to the hospital. we could turn everyone down. But I said 50%. Thank you.
Councillor Bell and then Councillor McAlpine.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I am in support of what Brian has suggested. Whether it's half the total or some other number, I don't mind. I think it's time we actually came to the table with some serious fundraising thinking. This is a big issue we're going to have to deal with. We just need to start somewhere, and I think symbolically, now is the time to start. So if it's a different number, I can support it. If it's the number Brian suggests, I can also support that.
Councillor McAlpine? Councillor Kyle's next.
Okay, I'm not in favor of the motion at this point. I'm concerned that the way that we're approaching this, I think that we should be, and I agree, that having money set aside for the hospital, we need to start doing it, probably in this budget cycle coming up as a separate line item, because I think that we support a lot of the organizations in this county, such as recreation and sports and stuff like that, and we subsidize that for millions of dollars. And a lot of these organizations that we're talking about now are grants for some of our smaller groups, but I think there is a room to relook at this process and look at organizations that are outside of the actual county that we're giving donations to, that I kind of question why we're doing that, because we have a lot of local organizations that could need the money before that. And if we were looking at that manner of that and reducing that money, maybe that would be money that could go towards the hospital in that case. At present, I think that there's a lot of organizations that are still struggling because of COVID and just getting over that, and still need that finances to help them be a financial viable organization. And I think that it would be a shame that we turn our backs on them. But I do think there is a real need to rethink maybe some of the numbering processes that we are doing at this present for our grant system. So I'll just leave it at that.
Thank you. Councillor Kyle.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I think I fall in similar sentiment to Councillor Bell in that I do support the motion, whether it's 50 or whether it's any percentage of it. I do like the idea of starting some seed money for the hospital, which I do think is a major community project. And so while it's maybe not necessarily a grant per se, we're granting them some startup funds to get our contributions going. I think the other thing that struck me, obviously this is my first time going through this process, but I was blown away that there were over 15 organizations that had multiple applications. And I get it, there's multiple streams of funding, but at the same time, putting in 3 grants for a total of $15,000 or $20,000, and I'm guessing is kind of a recurring theme. This isn't the first time, this is not their first rodeo. I don't know, I do take exception to that and think that we could be better focusing our dollars elsewhere and still supporting them in some capacity, but maybe not to the tune of necessarily $20,000 when those they look to be operating and costs that are just everyday doing of business. There are a number of applications in that pile that are for something outside of the regular operating, which to me, that strikes me as something that you would put in for a grant. So some sort of extra project or initiative that they've got underway. So I would support Councillor Coleman's motion, whether the number can be discussed, but fully in support.
Anyone else have any comments? I have a couple. Just as Councillor Coleman said, years ago when he was on council, the total was maybe 100,000. Just reminding council that we have one ask of 100,000 for the hospice, which just shows you how the need has changed. And we all, you always want to support the hospice, but I mean, $100,000 is an awful lot of money to be doing every year right off the hop before we start dealing with people that are looking for money to keep the lights on. And although it's not the county's problem to keep their lights on, everyone wants to do the sort of warm and fuzzy thing when it comes to these applications, because someone gets joy out of all of these events and applications that we see in front of us. So no one wants to look like the Grinch, but also we have to live within our means And it's a big difference between 400,000 and 100,000, obviously. Do you want to change the 50 to something else? The only other thing I can tell you is really the province hasn't even given Brant or Brantford the authority to build a hospital yet. You know that it hasn't started yet. We don't have provincial approval to build a hospital. So we are a little bit, this hospital is not going to be seen for 10 to 12 years. So we do have a little bit of time to put a process in place so that we can do the responsible thing and start putting money away and things. Because really, it hasn't even started yet. I'm on the campaign to raise the money, and we haven't started yet. So, I mean, we could do that, and it would just go to a fund that would pay for consultants and things like that. But the actual go light hasn't been given by the province for us to fundraise for a hospital proper yet. Councillor House.
Thank you for that timing clarification, which I think is important. Through you, Mr. Mayor, as this is a motion on the table that we will vote on, it's been seconded, could I have a clarification of the dollar amount that is being proposed to be taken out of the grant money for the hospital?
It's 180,000.
And that's what we'll be voting on.
That's what his motion is. So that's why I'm going back to Councillor Coleman asking if he wants to adjust that figure before we vote. Do you want to leave it at 180? And he's going to leave it at 180, Councillor Oakley.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, just a procedural question. Is this resolution essentially replacing 4 on the agenda, or will we still have an opportunity to talk about sort of allocating some of the grants specifically? I don't really want to complicate this already, but I do have some suggestions afterwards, hopefully.
Yeah, I think it's going to get complicated, Councillor Oakley. But what we're deciding on now is whether we start the complication from 180 or whether we start it from 360. So we're going to wait and see how this motion goes, how this vote goes, and then we'll see what happens after that. Any other questions? It's on the table. Divide it by 2. Give half to the hospital. The rest goes to the grants to be talked about, discussed later. Councillor Pierce.
Right, and I just want to clarify the point. We're not giving half to the hospital per se. What we're doing is we're starting what is going to be many, many, many millions of dollars that we're going to have to contribute to a fundraising.
Absolutely.
So we're starting that off.
Yeah.
And
We don't have to give them the money right away. We'll wait till it's appropriate. We'll have the big check and the big moment in the sun, and we'll give them the money when it's necessary. Councillor Coleman.
Called seed money.
Seed money. Councillor Bell.
Yeah, it may seem, Mr. Mayor, it may seem like a relatively small sum of money relative to $40 million we have to raise, but having been involved in a fundraising campaign for the Community Health Hub, one of the steps we took, which was to employ a professional fundraiser, was the secret to getting success. And indeed, $180,000 will provide enough money to get that individual. And then we're away. And then we can really start thinking about growing the 40 million over a reasonable period of time. So I can see good uses for it, even if it doesn't appear to be making a big dent in 40 million.
Okay. Any other questions? Call the vote. All those in favor? Opposed? And it's carried. Okay, so that means that now we have $180,000 to give away under the grants. So they're all going to have to probably be tweaked. We do have a formula set out here that takes them down by another 25% or 40% or whatever you want to suggest. We have flow sheets and things ready to go. Councillor Bell.
Yeah, I'd like to make a motion that we go the simplest route we can here, and that we distribute the $180,000 proportionately as per the staff report.
Seeking a seconder. Councillor Oakley. Discussion. Councillor House.
So just question of clarification, and also for folks who there may be people, we have a large audience today, and people watching from home. Just to clarify, so we're starting with a fund of $180,000, and Counselor Bell, is your, just clarification, to allocate those funds based on the scoring,
On a proportionate
on a
basis.
proportionate to scoring, right?
Yes,
And the scores were, created based on a scoring matrix that we recommended. So that's just wanted to clarify that. Thank you. And
I'm gonna get the clerk to read the motion again.
Through you, Mr. Chair. So the motion that we just passed has read, whereas the 2023 approved budget includes $360,000 for community grants, that 50% of the $360,000 be allocated towards the Brantford General Hospital new builds, and that the remaining $180,000 be allocated proportionately to the grant applications based off staff scoring.
And that's what we've voted on.
we haven't voted on it yet.
We voted on the first part of it, yes. Now we're waiting on the second part, and that's Councillor Bell's motion, which says he wants to distribute it equally according to the scoring that the staff report shows. Yeah? Councillor Pierce.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm just wondering here, and I appreciate where Councilor Bell's coming from here, that may be the easier way to do it. But if we just, in essence, split the 360 in half, if we were to split the allocations in half, would that not get us to where we want to go?
Split the 180 in half, you mean?
No. So if we were to take the allocations that are there
Yes,
and we split them in half,
yes.
even though on the, when it talked about the scaled allocations, if we were to split those, would that not get us to where we?
It's the same thing. Oh, sorry, Heather.
Just on your screen, we've done that math now, so the committee's amendments outlines what that's scaled at for half the award based on the tech review, based on the scaling to get to the 170. Because it also, because we still have way more asks than we have amounts. So the scaling factor now, and I'm sorry, I can't see what that is, 0.43 or something, 0.42. So that's where we get to make the 170. Now that does include the 2 agricultural societies. I've just reduced their allocations by half. I haven't scaled them. We haven't done any scoring for them. So those 2 are taken down by half, and this gets us to the rest of it.
That's not going to make for happy campers at the fairgrounds in Burford and Paris, just so you know. They budget on that, and I'm glad Robert's not here because he would say that they're counting on that. So, I mean, it's up to council what they decide to do, just knowing that the fairgrounds and the Burford fairgrounds do count on that 10 grand. So,
Well, I think
Councillor Oakley.
So through you, Mr. Mayor, I do have a series of suggestions here. I don't know how we kind of just one at a time would probably be most appropriate.
Well, we could start, I guess.
Okay. My first suggestion here would be I don't feel, given that our funds here are particularly tight, and we have a variety of charities, non-for-profit groups that we should consider not funding out the various for-profit groups or private businesses. This would be application numbers 8, 15, 22, 30, and 52. Most of which as well, I believe, all scored below the 5 as well, which puts into Councillor Pierce's point there. So that's sort of my first suggestion.
Those are grants you don't want to give anything to.
Correct.
All right. Does everyone want to take a minute to find out what those grants are?
I would also like to note as well, between the scoring summary and the main document, the numbers are slightly different. So let me review this here. Sorry, my apologies. So that would be 8 Colton's Farm. That would be 15 West Central Summer Showdown. That would be 22 Playful Fox Productions. That would be 30 Mackenzie Creek Music Festival. and that would be 52 Sanderson Center Foundation.
Those are the grants that Councillor Oakley is suggesting we give nothing to. Councillor House.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, through you. So I'm going to respectfully counter that if the argument, if Councillor Oakley's argument is that we're removing them due to them being for-profit, or, and what was the other? Private industry, private business. I think that's setting a new criteria, which the applicants weren't told up front. Like we established a criteria last year for this year, and it certainly would be an appropriate staff recommendation when we come on the back end of this and look at how we want to do it next year. But I'm not sure it's necessarily fair to all of the applicants to delete them for that reason. I would be more supportive of deleting an applicant based on low score, because we set the score grid. So that's just a counter opinion.
Okay, that's good, Councillor Oakley. Thank you for that. I am surprised that the Sanderson Center Foundation, being a branch or a department of the city of Brantford, would be coming to us for money, but having sat on that foundation myself, I'm not sure why we're doing that, but, or why they applied, but they did, so. Any other suggestions or conversation? Councillor Kyle.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. So I definitely get where Councillor Oakley is coming from. I also can agree with Councillor Howes in that it does kind of present new criteria that weren't there. I would probably be more inclined to either, like Councillor Howes had said, the ones that don't meet a certain threshold, or the other option that's crossed my mind is that if one of these groups has put in multiple applications, perhaps we fund one of them and not three.
Thank you for the complication. Who else wants to say something? Councillor Miller.
Mr. Mayor, I'm a little confused. Oakley, taking out the Mackenzie Creek Music Festival. It's not a for-profit. Just I need the criteria for why he wanted to take this one out.
Councillor Oakley, why were you picking on number 30? 29 on your list? 31. Oh, 31. So 30 on mine.
First, I gotta find it on the scoring sheet here. Sorry, Mike.
Mackenzie Creek.
Yeah, I suppose my logic there was it's an event that sells ticket. Presumably, it should be able to stand on its own if you're selling tickets for an event. I suppose was my logic there again, and then they're pretty close to the 5 cutoff. But again, I suppose my logic here was trying to come down and figure out how to make this work with half of our funds. Yeah. We've already introduced the complication of we are changing criteria now to give money to the hospital, which wasn't there before. Thus, I view it kind of as open season in regards to our criteria. So, to be fair, but if people aren't feeling it, that's fine.
Okay, Councillor Bell, you're next.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I can see where Councillor Oakley is going on this one, but I think the argument for weeding out lower scores makes more sense because there was a rule set that we gave to all of these applicants. It's a bit like the official plan. We get developers coming along and say, we've got to do it now because that's what the official plan says. We can't come along and say, well, there's a new official plan, so you've got to change things. It doesn't work that way. Neither should it work that way in this situation. But I can go along with a lower score, provided we didn't make the applicants aware of the scoring system before we started. And I don't know whether we did. Because if we made them aware of the scoring system before we started, then I think we should stay with the scoring system and just divide it as, just follow the guidance of staff and their analysis.
Councillor Garneau and then Councillor House.
I think where I sit on this is similar to Councillor Oakley, asking the question of what's going to go ahead if we don't fund it fully or don't fund it at all, and those things that have a revenue stream attached for them are different perhaps than those that might not be able to happen if we weren't here to help them out. One of the things that struck me as I was going through these is that there are a number that create inclusivity in our community and accessibility. And then there are some that are exclusive for individuals, and there's either barriers to participation, some of the more elite competitive youth sports leagues, for example, that have a high price point associated with being able to enroll your child in that, versus a softball league that is actually quite affordable for families, and that, you know, if we don't fund means they don't have that hand up to continue to offer something. I'm in agreement on the private business thing. That one struck me. You know, having agritourism myself, I never would have thought to apply to this for my own business, especially when there's other ways to go about getting that sort of capital. So more generally, I am on board with Councillor Oakley's amendment, and I do think we should look at the organizations that have asked for multiple amounts, as well as things that perhaps would go ahead without our funding, because when we took the money for the hospital, the net result is now we have less to go around, which means I do think we have the opportunity as council to really look through and make sure that it's going to the right places, because perhaps there are some now that have lost money through the grant that means that they're no longer viable. And I think that's the value proposition that unfortunately we're stuck with, because I don't think there's any easy way to go about this without us, Mr. Mayor, you say sounding like Scrooge. It's a tough one, but that's kind of philosophically where I'm at with it.
Councillor Pierce.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. And I think if I could just direct everybody to page 6, where it talks about the scores, okay? And the bottom one there is a score of 0 to 5. Key data is missing and it's difficult to fully evaluate their application. I think that's huge. Whether there's a scoring system or not, there obviously there is, and it's been known for the last few years that this is how it's done. But when I see an application where there's key data missing and it's difficult to fully evaluate their application, to me, those are the ones that should go, if any of them are going to go. And it hurts me to say that because one of the ones that scored below the 5 is the firefighters, County of Brant Department Camp Phoenix, and that's a huge thing. And it's a wonderful thing. But I mean, we can't pick and choose with the ones. Well, I guess we can, but we shouldn't. I mean, like they scored below 5, a 4.3. But I mean, you know, there's 4.1, there's 3.8. Again, I have to keep coming back to it. If you're scoring 3.8 and 4.1 out of 10, something's wrong. You're not, to me, you're not putting the effort in to supply the material required to make a decision. So if we're going to get rid of any of them, I'm agreeing that those are the ones that need to go first.
Councillor Hauser next.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you, can we ask Heather Boyd to refresh us on how the grant process is explained to the applicants on the front end? Is the scoring system explained to them, or do they just know there is a scoring system?
The grant applicants would have been privy to last year's council resolution, which said that would be the grant scoring system going forward. So they did have a full application package, but for sure, most of them would know that the resolution last year was that those things would carry forward those numbers and the scores.
Are there any other questions? What we have on the floor right now is Councillor Bell, seconded by Councillor House. That we just, the money that's left, the 180,000 this year, because we can't change the rules halfway through the process, would just be divided based on the point system that we had in place for this session. And once we're not going to do that, I would suggest we need to go through every single one of these, because there's some that you might not want some that I don't want to give anything to. There's probably someone that Councillor Garneau doesn't want to give anything to, and Councillor House, and it's just going to be, that's the 1.5 hour meeting I was speaking at when we began. And I'm up for that if that's what you want to do. But right now, let's take the vote on Councillor House, seconded by Councillor Bell, seconded by Councillor House, that we just take the remaining pot of money and divide it amongst all the applicants at the same percentage as their marking percentage, with Councillor Oakley leaving his in, not pulling anything out, because that's what we're voting on first. If that's defeated, then we'll go back to some of Councillor Oakley's suggestions. So, do you want to read what we're voting on? I know, but I'm not sure anyone else does.
Through the chair, and that the remaining $180,000 be allocated proportionately to the grant applications based on staff scoring.
Claire, Councillor Miller?
Just, and what I would say is, if we want to change it, I think there are some things that should be changed. We change it for next year, so.
Yeah, noting that. Any other questions or comments? Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed? And carried. Well, does anyone have anything to say about what we've just done? Councillor House?
Mr. Mayor, would it be appropriate, because staff will be compiling their own recommendations for the 2024 process, but would it be appropriate now for us to take a few minutes for members of this council to offer some new criteria to go into the scoring? Would that be an appropriate?
I think so. Noting that we've handled the grants, they're all finished now. We're done with this group. Heather?
Sorry, I believe there's still a few recommendations that need to be addressed.
Okay.
The ones up there, I think number 1, we still need to approve. Number 2, number 3, and then we'll need to deal with number 5, and I think that's where Councillor House is sitting at.
Number 1 is victim services.
1 is the agricultural societies, and that number should be changed to 5,000 each.
Okay, they don't line up with my numbers, so. Oh, I see, okay. All right. So it's the 2 fairgrounds?
Yep, number 1 is for the 2 fairgrounds at a value of 5,000 each, to reflect the change in amount. Number 2 is that the request for ongoing pre-approved applications that came forward, we would look at those for 2024. And number 3 is that the emergency grants be deferred, and we will follow up with the groups to see where there is an actual emergency or if it's just additional operating funds they were looking for.
That's it? Okay, looking for a motion. Councillor Pierce?
So moved, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Coleman is seconding that. Any comments, concerns? All those in favor? Opposed? That puts the grants to bed. Now we can have discussion on what we're going to do with grants moving forward. Councillor Pierce.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think, again, if you look at that page 6, that's 0 to 5. And I know I was the one that said, 5 and under got 50%. If you're not willing to put forth the effort to give the information required, I'm sorry. I don't think you should get anything.
And we were very clear that we wanted to see boards of directors. We wanted to see responsible people. We wanted to see names that we recognized so that we knew that the money was staying local and that the addresses of some of these organizations were local. And I'm not sure that that happened everywhere.
So I would put forth that going forward, starting 2024, if you scored below the 5, you don't get anything.
Seeking a seconder, Councillor Miller.
I'll second it, but I was going to throw in my
speak to it too.
Correction.
All right. Do you want to speak to it now?
No, I have something else I'd rather. Oh, I can speak to what's on the number 5. Yeah, and it touches on what Councillor Kyle was saying earlier. And I was thinking about it as I'm going through it. What I don't like to see is padding a grant amount on the part of an applicant. Sometimes that happens, and we really only need 7,500, but I'm going to ask for 15,000 and whatever. I should get at least 10 or something like that. So I don't know how you do that. Maybe in the criteria you say something to the effect of it can't be more than 5% of their budget or something like that. But anyways, that's an issue I don't know how to deal with. But that's one issue I don't want to see is these guys asking for way more than they probably reasonably need. So just throwing that out there. Thank you.
Any other comments? Councillor House?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you regarding the issue that Councillor Kyle was bringing up, we have three different categories that they can apply to, right? Yeah. Capital, operational, and event.
Yeah.
It may be necessary for us to say pick two.
Yeah.
Right, or that there be a cap of $10,000.
Yeah.
To their total request. If you either way, no request over $10,000 totaling $10,000 combined would be considered.
Councillor Garneau?
I've got a few thoughts here. I like the ideas of the caps and the limits on organizations. For me, it would have been helpful to see in this if the activity or the organization had a way of generating revenue, kind of what that was and how much. Having spent some time looking into all the sports leagues, for example, like if you have a registration fee or what your ticket sales is, again, if we're using public money to subsidize something, it should be broadly accessible. That's just my view. But from a criterion looking at things, I think shifting the mindset that just because a group has asked for the money doesn't mean that necessarily we should give it to them, even if they score a certain way, because there are organizations that appear to be sustainable on their own based on the information presented, that our money's a nice to have. And there were groups that I think needed our money in order to do something successful and positive for our community that have now missed out. So if we're thinking more bigger picture, and one of the things that stood out to me, and I realize this won't be popular with my residents in Mount Pleasant, but that the school was asking for money for the playground. And I believe we have 10 elementary schools that kids in Ward 5 attend between the public and the Catholic board, depending on where you live. And if all of our schools just because we've asked doesn't mean we should give bucket, came and asked in this community, we would be, we'd be out of money very quickly. And so I think that we need to look at that differently. And I don't know how it's more I think for staff to reflect on kind of how we do this. I don't have the how, but that's kind of my thoughts on it. And of course, if you are a private for-profit business, even if you do make donations back to the community, I'm not sure that this is where we should be putting the tax dollars. So just some musings.
Yep. I think what we should do, or what we could do, is we could spark up an ad hoc committee now to work with staff so that we know what to say to people when they say, are there still grants, or, we were disappointed in what we got last time or whatever, so that we know how to explain it to people. And because I know there's going to be some people that are very disappointed tonight, and that's just where we are right now. So I think that we should have a committee set up to work with staff to develop an application form to be very, very clearly what you can ask for and what you can't ask for. So I don't know, does anyone want to sit on that committee? Yeah. Well, maybe it's going to be a big committee. That's good. Okay. Well, then what we'll do is Councillor Oakley, Councillor Kyle, Councillor Garneau, and Councillor Pierce, and myself will start the.
Do we want one from each board, Mr. Mayor?
If you want to do it that way, that'd be great. Do you want to do it? Do you want one councillor from each ward? Yep. So we got Councillor Garneau. We got David Miller. We have Councillor Pierce. We have Councillor Oakley, and we have Councillor Kyle. Councillor Oakley.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Should we move this as a motion after we resolve the motion? There's a motion on the floor right now, is there not, with 5?
Yeah, there is.
And then we can resolve it afterwards?
Yeah, then we can do the committee. Okay, read what we have in front of us.
through you, that any applicant scoring 0 to 5 in the 2024 community grants review be excluded from consideration.
We could almost take that off the floor and then have. There's no sense putting little hooks in it right now when we're going to investigate the entire process.
So why don't we just take all of this and put it to that committee then? Because there's like sorry, Mr. Mayor, through you, like all the suggestions, I think, are what the committee's gonna be doing. I think that's just my gut. Watch the video.
It's a little embarrassing, let's just have to, for people that are watching, because there's a lot of people that are really waiting for these checks. And they're not coming.
What? That's not true, Mr. Mayor. Everybody that asked for something is getting something. So.
I think a lot of people don't have things. And, you know, and you're right, out of us, everyone's lights on, the telephone station, but they're expecting, they're not going to get it, so there's a day of reckoning coming for a lot of these people. That's the phone.
Just one final comment on that, Mr. Mayor. Yesterday morning, I had a phone call come in, and she dialed me by accident. And so I called her back and she says, have you got good news for me? Because it was a grant. She was talking about the grants. I said, no, we haven't done the grants yet. I says, that's tomorrow afternoon. Oh, but I says, I can tell you what I'm going to propose. That we give everybody 50% of what they asked on the scoring, and the rest of the remaining money go to the Brantford General Hospital new build fund. She said, I would appreciate that. Everybody uses the hospital. Now, I thought she was going to carve me out anew because her and I have had issues before. But she appreciated it and says, we'll accept anything we get.
Well, and your council supported you, Councilor Coleman, so there you go. The right thing happened. Anything else for the betterment of this committee before we break for dinner and come back as a committee tonight? Seeing nothing, looking for a motion to adjourn, Councilor Coleman.